Let's talk about the peace talks we mentioned at the start of the program. Joining us is of America correspondent Dorian Jones. Dorian Jones is in Istanbul, Turkey. Welcome, Dorian. Thanks for joining the program.
Good morning.
Now, what can you tell us about these talks as they are today? We understand both delegations, the Russians and the Ukrainians, have in fact arrived. And where are we at the moment?
Well, as we speak, these negotiations have started between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations. They flew in late last night, an indication this is very much a last-minute affair. In fact, the agreement to meet in Istanbul only followed a conversation between the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. President Erdogan addressed the delegations before the start of talks this morning, saying that in peace there are no losers. But he did indicate that this is a very difficult negotiations that lay ahead of today's talks, pointing out that there are big differences, but at the same time saying that peace has to be the goal. It has to be said, though, both sides really are offering any high expectations of any major breakthrough, given that there are huge differences between the two sides. There is possible hope that some humanitarian leave can be agreed as a step in a wider process, but at the moment, expectations are pretty low.
Well, President Erdogan is personally involved in these talks, unlike the ones that had taken place earlier. And as we have been reporting, he has a fairly good relationship with both sides, particularly with the Russians, it does appear. So is it possible to assume that his involvement in this round of talks, and because they are face-to-face, we could reasonably expect that the outcome might be different from those that had taken place earlier?
I think that is a bit of a stretch. I mean, there is a sign that possible the fact that the talks have been held in Istanbul as opposed to the previous talks, which are held in Belarus, which is a country that is seen as very close to Russia, and Ukraine have been very uneasy about holding talks there. They wanted a neutral place, and Turkey is seen as neutral, given the fact that the Turkish president does have very good relations with both the Ukrainian and the Russian president. In many ways, Turkey has been trying to present itself as possibly in a unique position to offer the opportunity of a breakthrough. But the reality is that there are such big differences between the two sides. Russia calling for the neutralization, neutrality of Ukraine, and also the recognition of breakaway states in Ukraine as to be recognized internationally. That is totally unacceptable to Ukraine. Ukraine says its territorial integrity is not going to be negotiated. So there are big differences still, and I don't think anyone's expecting any change there. I mean, what they hope is that possibly these talks can start a process where they can start to lay the groundwork for an ultimate meeting between the Ukrainian and Russian presidents. And I think all sides recognize that only when those two leaders sit down together at a table is there any realistic hope of an end to this conflict. The Russians have ruled that out at the moment, saying there's no point in talking unless there is something tangible that we can agree on. And there is a recognition that that isn't where we are at the moment. But the idea of these talks is to get to that point where they can bring the two leaders together. I think also Ukraine will be looking for, like I said, some humanitarian concessions, the opening up of besieged cities to allow civilians to leave these cities in safety. Possible also a ceasefire Ukraine is calling for, but at the moment Russians don't appear to be very interested in that, and that is an indication that there's still a long way to go before an end to this conflict is in sight.
Well, there's one of the big concessions, one of the issues that you talked there about, that there's a big gulf between both sides, is the issue of Ukraine joining NATO and guarantees that Russia wants that it will not go down that line. During the course of this week and sometime last week, the Ukrainian president seemed to indicate some flexibility on that matter, that he would be willing to discuss that. Would this have any impact, do you think, on what is possible now, if at least on that subject there is some move forward?
Well, I think certainly that was seen to be as a possible sign that the gap between the two sides could be narrowing. You're right that Ukraine has been pressing to join NATO. They see that as its ultimate guarantee of security against Russia. And Russia has said that that is one of the reasons why it is intervening, because it doesn't want NATO on its border. But having said that, the Ukrainian president has indicated they could be open to the idea of neutrality, putting aside its NATO membership aspirations. But one key demand in exchange for that concession that Ukraine is demanding is security guarantees, guarantees of that Ukraine would be protected if Russia was to ever intervene again. Now, given the fact who could give such concessions, who would risk a possible ultimate confrontation with Russia? Russia is a nuclear power is the big question. And the only countries that you can consider would be the United States or NATO itself. And it's far from clear whether any of these countries or organizations are prepared to risk a war with Russia in the future. And that in exchange for giving guarantees of safety to Ukraine. So in many ways, this concession by Ukraine isn't seen as such a huge step forward. It's more a sign of goodwill. But again, unless there is a gap of bridge of trust that is resolved between these, and there are some sorts of frameworks of security that both sides, both Ukraine and Russia, can feel secure, then there isn't really any hope of peace or an end to this conflict. And many observers are also pointing out that is Russia really sincere in these talks? It's possibly a sign that Russia is taking part in these talks just to alleviate the growing international sanctions it's facing and the threat of further sanctions. And Russia's hoping that if it appears at these talks, then further sanctions may be put aside. So there's a lot of questions about how sincere Russia is in these talks as well, because no one really knows what Russia ultimately wants. It seems quite ambiguous about that. So there's like I said, the expectations are pretty low. But having said that, the fact that the people are meeting for talks in a neutral venue is in many ways seen as positive, and that was the message of President Erdogan today. At least people are talking, and that can't be a bad thing.
President, that's the U.S. president now, Joe Biden. So much has been made about his comments in Warsaw, Poland, and I just wonder if those comments calling President Putin a butcher, and of course the part where he talked about the fact that Putin cannot remain in power and sparking a huge debate about regime change, possible regime change as a U.S. policy for Russia. Do you think that complicates this kind of talks and the question of guarantees, security guarantees that Ukraine wants and that only the United States can give, especially if the person on the other side is Russia? Do you think that plays any role in this kind of talks and the fact that maybe that could complicate things for the two presidents if and when the idea that the two of them should sit down is muted?
Well, I don't think, I think that the international reaction, and even from diplomatic reaction across Europe, it doesn't really help when the idea is that you're trying to reduce tensions, at least the risk of a further spreading of the conflict beyond Ukraine to NATO partners, which is seen as the Armageddon, the ultimate nightmare solution, given the fact that these are all NATO nuclear powers. So I don't think that it particularly helps. But does it change things particularly on the ground? I don't think so. I think Moscow will undoubtedly be using this to bolster its position, certainly domestically. You can be sure that those comments of President Biden will be broadcast across Russian TV, saying, look, this is the existential threat that we are facing. This is the reason why we have to take such drastic actions in places like Ukraine, because we are facing this threat from the world's most powerful country. Now, that will be used domestically, but does it change things on beyond that? Probably not that much. And I think Moscow will see that as a misstep by Biden, which they will exploit. But will it change the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine and Russia? Probably not. It just complicates things a little bit. But the ultimate problem is trying to find some basis of trust between these two sides, and that is a long way off. And I think that in many ways that the fighting on the ground will have to continue to a point where neither side believes it can win, or the cost of victory will be too high, and the diplomatic peaceful solution is the preference rather than fighting. And I don't think neither side has reached that point at the moment. So I think the expectation is that this conflict will go on for some time. It's becoming a deadly war of attrition. The feeling is that these talks, possibly, like I said, will be hope that they can offer some humanitarian relief, which possibly could lead to further steps of trust further down the road between the two sides. But that's a long way off. I think that all that they can hope from today's talks is that they will agree to meet again, and possibly step by step bring a point where the Russian and Ukrainian presidents will meet. But there's little hope that that is anytime soon.
Before I let you go, I must ask, I mean, the initial reports about this meeting talked about 2 days. Now, the meeting has, in fact, quite started. So when you think there is an indication, or there will be an indication, that the talks are making progress, if altogether not succeeding, would that be, for example, if they went on into the second day? That would mean that there's something being discussed that both sides are interested in concluding? Or do we just take it that both sides are going to discuss and each side is going to go back, and only when they go back do we get to know what it was that came out? And if so, what role is Turkey playing in the talks themselves?
I think, yes, I think that would be a good way of reading it. The expectation, I mean, the talks were initially going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but they were delayed until started today. And now I think, at least initially, it appears the expectation that they will only last a day. But if they continue into the evening, if they continue to another day, then yes, the more talks is seen as a positive thing. It means that they have something to talk about, and it's worth them sitting down and talking. But I think that also, I think the fact is that the people meeting here are quite low level compared to, they're not the foreign ministers. These are seen broadly as presidential advisors. There are people that they need to report back. They don't, from what we understand, don't have real position of power to make absolute commitments or concessions on either side. It's more basically listening to what the other side says and finding out, is there a possible way of compromise further down the road? So they will probably go back. And if there's further talks scheduled, say in a week's time or something like that, that would be seen as positive. I think the idea is that you need to start this as a process of talks, and I think that if a process does start, and if Turkey has said it's ready to do this. In fact, President Erdogan, when speaking, appeared to indicate that Turkey isn't playing a mediating role at the moment. He said we are ready to do that at any moment, but we're quite happy at the moment just to provide a place to meet beyond that, I don't think Turkey is playing any other role, and President Erdogan did indicate that. But Turkey is ready to do that and believes it is probably uniquely placed geographically, and the fact that it is seen as an honest broker on both sides, and as well as Turkey being a NATO member as well. So I think Turkey is ready to be in that position, but no one is really calling upon those services as of yet. And I think the hope will be that at least that this meeting will lead to another meeting being agreed at a week's time, possibly, or a couple of weeks' time. That would be seen as something positive, and that there is a process beginning. But beyond that, I don't think anyone has higher hopes.
All right, then. Thank you so much for this update. Dorit joins us from Istanbul in Turkey. We'll be coming back to you if there are any updates on these talks, and if, as so many people around the world are hoping, there are breakthroughs in them. Thank you so much at this time.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the security challenges posed by this war. Please stay on with us.